Our next concern with respect to the trial of Jesus involves a case where recorded secular history is said to conflict with biblical history. Isn't that right?
Yeah, you got that right. Here's the problem. Pontius Pilate. Secular history says he was more like this guy. But in the New Testament, he seems more like this guy. So what's the deal, bub?
That's a fair question. And the answer is, if you read the New Testament carefully, you'll find that Pilate actually is this guy.
You gotta be pulling my leg.
Nope. Let's see why. To frame the issue this time, we'll need to talk a bit about how non-biblical history depicts Pontius Pilate. Two main sources inform us. The first of those is the Jewish historian Josephus. The other is the Jewish philosopher and part-time historian Philo of Alexandria. The sum of the matter is that both of these guys paint a picture of Pilate as a guy with a serious attitude problem, especially towards Jews. He incites insurrections, severely punishes seditious Jews, and thumbs his nose at Jewish customs. In contrast, the critics say the Pilate of the New Testament is, well, a real wuss. They describe him as weak-minded, vacillating, good-natured, even, charming. They find it hard to believe that the Pilate known from Josephus and Philo is the same one who seems to bargain with the crowd for the life of Jesus. So, which of these is correct? To answer this question, we need to first answer another one. Not who is Pilate, but rather who was opposing him. Anti-Semites have wrongly concluded that the mob which demanded the release of Barabbas and the execution of Jesus was representative of the Jewish people. That could hardly be the case, of course. The 3,000 or so people who would fit into the area where the trial probably was would comprise only 2% of all people in Jerusalem at the time, and not even 1,000th of the Jews alive on the planet. And that's assuming there were that many on hand in the first place. Some scholars estimate that the mob had as few as 50 people in it. But who were these people? Fickle everyday citizens? People looking for a spectacle? Friends and family of Barabbas? Well, the most likely answer is found in the clues of the New Testament itself. As Ian Wilson, author of The Evidence for Jesus, pointed out, the high priests had at their disposal more than 20,000 attendants who worked at the Jerusalem temple. You can bet most of these would do as they were told, and it wouldn't take much to assemble as many of them as needed to get a good crowd together. You can notice the following clues on this. So what's the bottom line? This was a rent-a-crowd in the pay of the high priest, and don't think Pilate didn't know this. Now let's discuss how it would affect his behavior as we know it from Josephus and Philo. My contention is that in Pilate as depicted in the Gospels, we see a tough-minded Roman governor who is contemptuous of his subjects and their leaders, and he's also resentful in an attempt to manipulate him for their own ends. In response, Pilate cleverly and maliciously turns the tables on them. But how did the process start? We can begin by pointing out that Pilate was certainly aware of the impending arrest of Jesus before it happened. Critics may simply assume that the priests woke Pilate up first thing that morning with him having no idea what was coming. But here's a more likely scenario. Pilate knows the arrest is coming. He's been told that a seditionist, possibly dangerous, will be arrested and brought to him on a capital charge. What shows up, though, isn't a dangerous seditionist, but someone who, by Pilate's reckoning, is merely a backwards and mostly harmless preacher. The clue that Pilate knows something is afoot here is given in this passage. He knew this was some sort of little game the priestly leaders were at, and that they were using him as their hatchet man. In that light, we can now better understand Pilate's many delaying tactics in the Gospels. He wasn't doing all of this because he liked Jesus, or because he was being weak or vacillating. He was doing all of this because he was throwing annoying roadblocks into the paths of the Jewish leadership. With that, we can return to something we closed with in the last vid, where Pilate says, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." This was a clue that Pilate knew that there was actually some religious matter at issue, not a political one. It was also a sarcastic way of saying, "Leave me out of your petty squabbles and manipulations. I'm not going to be your hatchet man." In the end, Pilate probably saw Jesus as nothing more than a man who was a little touched in the head, possibly insane, and in that culture, perhaps insane because he had been touched by the gods. But in the final analysis, he saw this Jesus character as nothing more than a pawn in a game of chess with the high priest, and showed Jesus no more regard than he would a pawn that he could sacrifice without regret. So, the Pilate of the Gospels is the same Pilate we see in Josephus and Philo. We'll pick up with a few more issues surrounding the trial of Jesus next time. Got it ahead of you, didn't I?